All right, let's get started for today. And let me just put up the agenda for today first. Let me create the day 10 folder. And also clone the repository from GitHub. Okay, and in today's session, what we mainly want to do is uh, we would like to get some routing related authentication going. Plus, we would touch a topic called React hooks, which is a fresh topic. Uh, these hooks are just implemented in a very recent version. There's 16.8, I guess, and we'd be covering that as well. Plus, we'd also be setting up a server. So now what we are trying to do is, by setting up a Node.js server, we're trying to prepare ourselves for a GraphQL implementation. So we might not be implementing GraphQL today, but in the next session, we'll be going for a small implementation of GraphQL that would act just like an introduction to GraphQL. All right. So that is where we are heading towards, and we are setting ourselves for that. So let's first see what we are going to go for in today's session. Now, as far as not yesterday, but the day before session was concerned, we went for user state in the Redux store. We went for users flow, that is login, task manager, logout, and then back to login. We showed and hid the button that was a logout and then login and register buttons as well. And we also created a global alert component that self-destructs, automatically. So now what we are trying to go for is this pending implementation of routes, that is authenticated routes. And then we would also like to go for React hooks. And there are so many hooks that are available in React, but the two that we are going to use are the one is called the useState hook, and one is called useEffect. All right, so useState and useEffect. So this would help us to get the state going. And we would start with a basic example of counter, like always, and then we would implement this useState and useEffect in our task manager project as well. So then we would like to set up a Node.js server. And this would be a REST server, REST API server. And this would act as an introduction to how to set up Node.js. So if anyone doesn't have a background on Node.js, this is something that would help you to get a firm background on from basic introduction to get Node.js and so Express server up and running. We would not go for any database connectivity. So our data would still be some variable that is on our Node.js server altogether. But the whole aim is to replace the JSON server that we have been using. All right. So this Node.js Express server, it would be running in on port number 3001, like the JSON server was running, but we'd like to just replace it with this Node.js and Express server. I would later give you another repository for this REST API and GraphQL server. I would like to keep things separate, where the client would be a separate thing and the server would be a separate thing altogether. And you would get and maybe later on you may also start building on that repository, maybe submit some PRs and all. So the server repository would be a different one from today onwards. All right, so let's just get going. And I believe everyone is clear on what we are trying to cover in this particular session today. Yes. All right, very good. What about other participants? Okay. All right, so let's get started with the authenticated routes. And these are higher order components that we're creating. Now, when we say higher order components, the higher order components are the ones that take in some properties and they give you a new component, right, in return. So a component that generates another component then provides you in return. That's mainly what a higher order component is. And we'll be creating one as far as authenticated routes are concerned. So let me just start this project. And also, let me open this in our editor. Okay, taking some time to get this opened, but let's wait. And here we go. So as far as the source is concerned, we have actions, components, config, model, reducer, saga, services, and all those things. As far as the app.js is concerned, this is the place where we're actually defining all the routes that we are looking for as far as implementation in our project. So all these are simple routes, so which means I should be able to go to any route whatsoever, and I should be able to fetch any data that I want. So as of now, I'll just start my JSON server, but later I'm definitely willing to replace this with an actual Node.js Express server. So let me just start this up. We'll call it JSON server, db.json, and I'd go with the port number 3001. All right. And we would like to check this tasks. All right. And you can see that the tasks are all displayed in this particular case. So this is done. And we would, and the task detail is also coming in. So that is also done. All right. Without any problems, actually, no routing related issues, and we're still not logged in. So that is the problem that we would like to solve. All right. So what we can do here is we can create a separate section altogether, a set of components that are just meant for routing. So I can create a folder. Maybe I can call it routes. And this routes would have a specific route, a typical route that would help you to authenticate a certain section. So say, for example, these are the two routes that we want to authenticate, right? So we saw that there is a render method already available. So this here can be done in such a way that I can go for something like render, all right? And render can basically check for some local storage, get item kind of a thing, or not even local storage, but we can have that whole user connected to this app component, and then we can go for an if condition and either return a task manager component or maybe redirect to login. So that kind of a thing is something that is expected. But you can imagine that right now we're just having two routes that need to be protected, and if we have like multiple routes, then it'll be really difficult for us to get this render method for each and every route. So this, though it's a valid way to go for it, but it will not be maintainable in the long run. So there is another way that I'd be implementing, but then again, this whole authentication aspect can be implemented in so many different ways altogether. So what we can do here is we can go for something like we do have a route, and I would create one file in here which will call user route.js. Now this is just a component, just another component that I'm creating, but this would be meant for authentication of that particular route. The whole aim of this user route is to just create a wrapper over the normal route, which would essentially make a decision on whether you want to get the route, whether you want to pass the user through this route or whether you want to block the user inside this particular route. That kind of a decision is what this whole thing would be making. So this is a normal component. So again, import React from React. It's just a functional component, and I'd go for user route, and this would take in certain props. All right. And what I do in here is I import route from React router DOM, and I would return route like so. Also, I would pass all the properties that this route has. So this can be done. What am I doing here is I'm just invoking the route component from the React router DOM, plus I'm passing whatever the properties this user route is getting, I'm passing it in here. So we're just using a spread operator, which helps you to pass all the props. And as of now, I just export default user route. All right, something like this. So this right now doesn't make any decision. This doesn't actually do anything at all. This just gives you whatever the route is. But this is a wrapper, a component, and this would help you to make some decisions on whether the user is logged in or not, on the factor whether the user is logged in or not. So here right now, if I import this route inside my app component, we just import it right above here somewhere. All right. And instead of this task detail and task manager, instead of the route, I can go for user route like so. So what I'm doing here is I'm using another component to return a route, because this user route, when invoked, will just return the route component with all the properties, meaning path, exact component, whatever the properties that we are passing, it will just invoke the route component with that properties. So doing nothing at all, but it adds one layer to us so that we can program something in it. As of now, if I do login, let's say admin and hit enter, or even if I go to the task detail and all, it doesn't actually cause any problems. It is working as it is working. And if I even go for tasks, it would give me all the tasks and all. So that is something that is already working. All right. And I would like to now make a decision in here whether to display the normal route or whether to redirect the user to a different route. All right. So I believe, first of all, this usage of a higher order component or a wrapper component, I believe this, first of all, is clear to all. Yes. Okay, very good. What about other participants? So Ketan, because right now it is not yet complete, I would like to, I'd just like to wait for this whole implementation to be complete, and then I would explain the whole thing again. All right, Ketan? As of now, it is just partially complete. Like, we are just doing nothing at all. We are just returning the route, which behaves the same way as of now. Once it is done, I'll just explain it, the whole thing again. Is that okay? All right. The syntax has to be clear though. The syntax that I'm using is clear for all, right? And Ketan as well. All right. So now what I want to do is, here I want to make a decision on whether I should show this route or whether I should go for a redirect. And that will be totally based on whether the user is currently logged in or not. So what do I do to this particular user route component? Do I make it just a container, just a presentational component like this, which just shows you the route? Or do I make it a container component that would basically go for a connect with the Redux store? Anyone, any suggestions? Okay. Rita says that we should go for a container component. I believe everyone would agree with Rita on this, that a container component, and Shweta as well, right? Everyone agrees that this, if connected to the Redux store, we can easily make out whether the user is available in the application or not. Yes, everyone? So I would go for that. All right, import connect from React Redux, and I would go for connect. And what I think is I can just use that shorthand user. I'm just getting the user right away from the state, I'm just returning that user's object right here in the props. So now I can see if props.user, if the user is there, then we can just return the route component. Else, so basically if the user is not there, then I can go for a redirect. So I'd have to import redirect here. All right, and the redirect can be redirect to home. All right, so basically I'm redirecting to home. So now what happens is, right now the user route is used here at two places, that is the task manager and the task detail. So if the user is already logged in, these routes would already be displayed. So there'll be no problem at all, because user route, if the user is logged in, you'd see that it returns the route with all the properties. But if the user is not logged in, all right, this user route would go for a redirection, and hence we would be ending up at the default page. Default page again takes us to the login page. That's basically how it's working. So if I go for tasks, which is a user route, all right, if I hit enter, you can see that I am taken back to login, which is because of this else portion, because there's no user inside the state of the component. However, if I go for a login, like admin successfully login, you can see that user logged in, user is in the state, and I'm getting both the detail and the tasks related page as well. Now, if I go for an inspect element and I'm in a task detail page, right? And if I, for example, delete the local storage, which is this, I just get rid of everything. And then if I refresh, you can see that it takes me again to login. All right, so if there's no local storage, basically it'll just take you again to the login. All right, so this is basically what it is. And if I log in admin, and if I'm already logged in and there is local storage still present, this would still persist the local storage, and that persistence is coming in through this whole store that we went for dispatching the user logged in action. All right, so this is something that is already working from yesterday. All right, so this user route is something that we might want to consider as far as one of the features, where it guards your routes, and the whole guarding process, it is at one single place only. All right, and then you can similarly make a guest route kind of a thing, where if the user is logged in and the user comes to this login route, he might be redirected to the tasks route or something like that. That kind of an approach also can be done, but this is the way that we do any default route or guest route or user route or anything like that. These are components only, but we are just defining this differently, like we are considering them routes, and basically they are components only. All right, so I think this whole user route kind of a thing that we created, where it either returns a route or goes for a redirect, and that is based on this route. I believe this is clear, everyone, and especially Ketan, you're clear on this? All right, I'd like to have a confirmation from all the participants. Same way we can use role based as well, yes. And in this user route itself, you can make sure that you redirect to one thing or the other based on the role. So usually what would happen is props.user would also have a role if you are managing roles of the user. So in here itself, you can, the whole idea is to store the role inside the user in the Redux store. So you can use the role everywhere and just make a decision on what we can do. So you can name it, like instead of user route, you can name it an admin route or whatever, like admin route, or maybe let's say editor route or something like that. Based on the roles, you can different routes can be created as well, and then they can be used in here as well. So there are so many implementations that way. Once you get the concept, everything is simple to implement. All right, I would like to just confirm from all the other participants. There are certain participants, they have reverted. I'd like to just know from all that this is clear to all. Very good. So this routing authentication being done, we would now move on to React hooks. Now we are going to go for these two hooks, but there are so many other hooks that are available in React. So let me just point that out to you. React hooks, and right from 16.8, these things were introduced. Really handy tools, making it really easy to manage state of a component. And let me put it in here. All right. So, and also here are the hooks actually. Here is a reference. All right. So I would like you to go through these two docs, very good documentation that is available for React hooks. However, we'd like to see what we can do with hooks in here. So I might have to close this, and I might just maybe minimize this for, or maybe close this for a while. I'll still keep the server running. All right. I'll just go with the hooks with the basic React program, like a CDN kind of an approach. All right. Let me just put it in here somewhere. All right, I'm just creating an HTML file because I just want to go for the CDN approach. Open it up in my editor. And also, let me just open it up in the browser as well. Now, when we talk about React hooks, we have already got some bit of an idea on when hooks are used. And if you recall, maybe day 3 or day 4, maybe I went for this is Redux React, or maybe day 2 when I created some components. Yeah, there are two types of components in this and this. So not even day 2 actually. Let's see, when did we go for this? Maybe day 3. Yeah, state of the component. So when we went into day 3, we went for something like state of a component can be used in two ways. One is go for the class component where this dot state is there, this dot set state is available, or go for functional component and you can use React hooks. So what I think is, slowly and gradually, in every React project, there will be all functional components only, and they would be using React hooks to implement the state, because the whole point of using a class component was to get the state implemented, and now it is all done by React hooks itself. So there's no complication as far as any component is concerned. So all the components will be the same. That is functional components. That is in some years to come, all the developers would do functional components only. Right now we are in a transition phase, so we are learning the class component plus the functional component with hooks, but later on you can expect that it'll be all functional components. All right, so that is the whole aim, to make a functional component behave like a class component. There are two hooks that are available, which is one is useState and one is useEffect. So let's first dive into one basic counter program that we used to do, to learn certain things. Like I'll go with counter and React hooks. All right, and I would also get this here like an h1 saying counter, and an hr and an h2 with an id of counter. Oh, actually I don't want to use JavaScript at all. I'll just generate everything on the fly. So I'll just go for a div with a root, with a class root, or an id root would be better. All right, and this root would be my application. So I'm not actually preparing my application right away. I'll go for components, and I would go for a CDN. So React JS CDN. I'll just get these two links, React JS and React DOM in here. All right, and I'd go for a script, and it'll be type text / babel. I believe everyone would remember it from the day 1. And of course I need some babel as well. So babel.js, and let me go to setup in the browser. and I'd go with Babel in here. So we need React and Babel to get this whole thing running. And what I would do first to start with is just get a component, in here. So let's say I'll just go with a class component counter and a render method. And this, because it is a class component, it extends react.component. All right. And the render method, I'll just return a paragraph saying render or counter works. All right. And what I would do is I would go for a react dom dot render counter, and I would render it inside document dot get element by id root. All right, so I'm just rendering a counter component inside the root. So if I reload, you should see counter works displayed on the browser. All right, pretty straightforward. I believe everyone is clear on what I've done just now, right? Everyone? All right, very good. And now we'll just first make it working as a class component. So then I would convert it to a functional component with hooks so that I get the functionality shown to you on what exactly do I want. So I'd go for a React fragment and I'll go for an h1 slash h1. All right. And in that h1, I need that counter plus and minus and a couple of buttons, button slash button plus and minus. All right. And I need a state here. So state value, or maybe counter is 0. All right. And there'll be an increment and decrement where I'll just go with like this dot set state. This dot set state counter is equal to this dot state dot counter plus 1. This is my increment and this is my decrement function. All right. And on the click of the button, I'd call these increment and decrement functions. All right. And here I can display this dot state dot counter. All right, so this is my class component with the increment decrement. So if I go for this, you see that there's a 0 and it increments and it decrements because there is a set state. So whenever the state changes, there's a re-render would happen. That's basically the first thing. Also, what I want is as I increment the counter, this counter value has to be reflected inside the title of this particular document. So basically what I want to do is whenever the state changes, I want to modify the title of the document. I would just access the document.title directly in this particular case. So we can do it in the render method as well, but a better place would be something called component did update. Now component did update, it's also a lifecycle hook. Whenever the component updates, this lifecycle hook would be triggered and you can do anything inside the component did update. So I can go for something like document dot title is equal to clicks, that is the number of clicks, to be this dot state dot counter. All right, so when I reload, you can see that right now it is just the normal title that we have set, but as soon as the component updates, you can see in the title the value of clicks also update. All right, the value of the clicks update and this whole title gets set. So component did update is basically whenever the state updates, if you want to do some operation, some other operation related to something different, maybe call a service or maybe send some data to the store of the component and maybe update some other component, that whole side effects kind of a thing can be done inside component did update itself. So for that, you don't have to basically go for the render function. All right. So this component did update, and then there is also, we know that there is a component did mount, component did mount, that would simply be fired once when the component is mounted. So in that, if I want to set the document.title to 0 clicks, all right, something like this, then what would happen is, first it would normally render, and once the render happens, component did mount would happen, and there will be 0 clicks written over there, and component did update would happen then, which would simply get these things updated. So right now you see that the initial title is counter React hooks, but as I refresh, first counter React hooks, and as soon as the whole component is rendered, it becomes 0 clicks. And then if I start typing or start clicking the counter, this becomes whatever the value of the clicks is. All right. So this is what I want to ultimately achieve. The counter is one is the counter, but then I also want to achieve this kind of component did mount and component did update thing along with the set state. All that can be done with a functional component through React hooks. So I believe everyone was clear with the component did mount method because we implemented it at some places, but I think now everyone is also clear on the component did update hook as well, and everyone gets what I want as a functionality in eventual functional component that I create. Yes, everyone? Very good, guys. So I would like to now comment this out and create a similar component to start with. Just function counter. All right. This doesn't require any properties because we don't have any properties that we are passing in. And Rita has a question with component, with functional component, how to implement it. So yes, that is what I'm going for, Rita. So I'll return, as of now, we'll return this whole thing, whatever the render returned. All right. And for now, let me just get the H1 just blank. And on click, instead of this dot increment, it'll be increment. This dot decrement will be decrement. Now it's a functional component. I'd go for, well, actually, I'll just use that fat arrow approach that I've been using. So const counter. It actually doesn't matter if I go for a normal function or a fat arrow function, but there's one syntax that we are familiar to. So we are just using that. And then there will be a const increment. And then there will be a const decrement. Oops. Const decrement equal to a fat arrow function. All right. So I'm just keeping it this way so that it doesn't actually cause us any errors or anything like that. Okay. So if I now reload, this would give me something like this. There's nothing displayed in the H1. All right. And there's increment and decrement functions called, but they would simply do nothing. So no errors whatsoever, but nothing happens as well. So this is the way that I went for. All right. As of now, no errors at all. So first off, what I want is that I want an entity in a component like the state, which when updated, the component would re-render. So this React hooks provides us that kind of a thing. So let's see what React hooks provide. If I go for a React dot use state, all right, and if I just do a console log, this is the first React hook that I'm using, use state, that will provide you a state-like functionality. And if I do a console log of use state and if I refresh, you can see that I get an array of 2 elements. All right, the 0th element, that is the first element, is undefined, while the second element is a function. Now, first of all, let's see what is this undefined. This is the default value of the state that you want to set. So say, for example, if I say this to be 10, use state 10, then the first element would be 10. If I run this, the first element would be 10. right? So this is the default value of the state, the first element inside the array, and there is a function which is basically the setter function. It's equivalent to set state. All right, so we know that this use state would always give us 2 elements only. So what we can do is we can actually, rather than storing this inside an array and giving indexes and all, there is a better way of going for it, which is a destructuring. Like we can say counter and set counter and use state 0, because I want the default value of the counter to be 0. So react.useState returns us an array of 2 elements which we are taking in counter and set counter variables. Now counter is your state, while set counter is the equivalent of set state. All right, so I'll just comment this out in here. Like here counter is basically state dot counter, and set counter is basically set state equivalent. All right, set counter is set state equivalent. So I believe, so this whole relation, I believe it should be clear to all. And now things become easy for me. Like I can go for a counter displayed in here. All right, and if I reload, you can see that the counter is displayed. Plus and minus would not do anything, but this use state 0, the counter is displayed. And here I can just say set counter. All right, and what I want to set the counter to, can anyone tell me what should I set it to? On increment, what should I set the counter to? Counter plus 1. Very good. So I can go for counter plus 1, and set counter will be counter minus 1. All right, and let me just get rid of this just to make things really simple. And you can see that very less amount of code and a bit of more clarity on how this whole react.useState works. And if I reload, I should be able to get this update done. All right, so whenever the state changes, the components would re-render, and this return would be done again, and it gives you a feel of that particular class component altogether. All right, pretty clean as far as the code is concerned. So first of all, this react.useState, this should be clear to all. Yes, everyone? Very good. Yes, useState would be only used for functional component, Shweta, because this is meant for making everyone use functional components more. Class component already has the state there, so there'll be no react.useState or anything like that in the class component. All right, what about other participants? The main thing is the destructuring in here. We are just taking these two variables. We can name them anything we want, and we're just going for destructuring. Okay, now the side effect, that is, I want to update the title as well as people click on the plus and minus. So in that case, we'd use another hook which is called useEffect. It'd be like react.useEffect. Now the useEffect has a very varied implementation. Right now I'm just implementing it in a very basic fashion. All right, but there is a very good variety to how useEffect can be implemented. But since it is a very brief introduction, I'm just keeping myself limited to this. You can check out the hooks documentation later on how this can be used in multiple ways essentially. All right, so useEffect can take in a callback function. Here what I can do is document.title is equal to, let's just go for something like this, number of clicks, and let's interpolate counter. All right, useEffect number of clicks counter. So if I reload, and now you can see that the number of clicks counter is already updated. This is what we don't want. useEffect would simply run even if the component is mounted. So essentially useEffect gives you the facility of both component did mount and component did update. So for both, and you can see that this is still updating. So component did mount and component did update is what useEffect does for you, both of the React lifecycle hooks. Now this useEffect hook would basically update itself or call itself every time the re-rendering happens, every time the set counter kind of a thing happens. All right, but we also would need it in a way where if we want just the first initial load of the document to be affected. Like for example, if we take an example of an API call, we might just want the API call to be called only once and not on every re-render, right? So in that case, you can go for something like react.useEffect again. And as I said, it would work for both component did mount and component did update. It's replacement for both of them. I can go for a document.title is equal to 0 clicks. All right. And if I just, now we know that this would run all the time, even while mounting and while updating as well. So I can pass a dependency array, and dependency array is basically the array that would compare itself with the state of the component. And this would make the use effect run only once, while this use effect would run multiple times. This with a dependency array would just run only once. So if I reload, you can see that now first it says 0 clicks, which is this. All right. And now if I hit plus, it gives you the number of clicks. All right, like so. So the use effect with a dependency array right at the end would give you just the component did mount kind of a feel. It would run just once, while this would be something like a component did update. All right. So these two hooks are some things that are used for component did mount, did update respectively. All right. So this plus the react.useState, this allows you to implement the counter example that we went for using a class component. All right. So I believe this useState and useEffect hooks and the usage that it has, I believe this is all clear. Array can be some portion of the properties of the component as well, Shubham, so that it can be compared. But we are not going into that aspect yet. This would be just enough for us to get the API call going. Yeah, so blank array automatically refers to this use state 0 itself, and whenever the state changes, the array is compared again, and at that point the state would be obviously something different, and that's why the underlying function doesn't get called. It's a deeper understanding than what I'm just mentioning over here, but this, I believe, the syntax and the usage should be enough for us to get going with the useEffect hook for our class component, for our task manager project. All right. So I believe the syntax of this useEffect in two different ways is clear to all. Okay. All right. So now what we would be doing is we'd be going for the component that, like, there are two components that we have in our task manager project, which can be converted to functional components, which we would. All right. And any component that uses state can be converted to a functional component, like forms also. They can be converted to a functional component as well. So as of now, we just go with our class component, that is task list and the task detail. Let me just close this down. And we already have the server running. Let me just open the task manager again. And let me close everything up. Okay. So what we are interested in is the learn Redux, the detail page and the list page, where we want to go for the replacement of useEffect. Oh, this is the day 3 folder, right? Let me go into the day 10. Okay. All right, so if we now go for the components that we are looking for, which is one is the task list component and one is the task detail component. Both of them are class component. They have this component did mount and the state in here. Task list doesn't have any state as such, but it has this map state to props, but the component did mount method is here as well. So let's first try the task detail first, and then let's go to the task list, by the way. But with this task detail component, I just want to convert this whole class component to a functional component. That's the entire problem statement, and I'll be using the useState and useEffect hook both. All right, so I believe that problem statement is clear to all. Yes, everyone is clear on that problem statement. Yes, everyone. Okay, so let's convert this one to a functional component. I'll just comment this out, and it will be const task detail is equal to props. All right, and what I'm also what I also want to do here is just take in the match prop actually. So match, and I can go for a const id is equal to match dot params. That's where I get my id from, and I would like to return, and I do have the whole render statement in here. So if the task is there, then I would return a card and all, else I'll just go for returning the alert. So this is what I want to do in here. So let me just put it uncommented. All right, so task is not defined, right? We would have to get the task defined inside the state. You can see that inside this class component task is null. So we do the same in here. We go for const task and set task, and we'll go for a use state. Doesn't need a component, but it needs a use state in here. So I'd go for use state to be null. All right, so now we have that task defined, and it will obviously show me loading because the initial state is null and there is no task, and hence it should return this loading. And usually how do I do is this thing is really bothering me from so much of time. Usually the way I get this whole thing done is something like this, like if not task, then return loading, else return this. Doesn't actually make any difference, but this is even cleaner than the earlier approach, more readable. It will not make any difference as far as the output is concerned. It'll still say loading, but if there is no task, then I right away return the alert loading, else I return the main portion of the component render. All right, so this is initial, and I believe this task detail component and why it shows loading and the usage of use state and these two variables that I went for, task and set task, out of which set task is a function while task would be set to null. I believe all these things are clear to everyone. Yes. Okay, very good. What about other participants? All right, so now we'd go for the useEffect hook as well, and I just want to call it once only, so I would set it with the dependency array. So I think I can get it done in here. useEffect would be a function with an array, and what I can do is I can go for, let's say, get single task, and get single task expects an ID dot, then this whole thing can be done. So I can go for a get single task ID, and dot then I'll get that task, and I'll go for a set task method and put the task in there. And what I think is, I'll just name it differently so that it doesn't clash anywhere. Would not clash though, but just to get it differently. So now you can see that this whole thing works. Learn React router and all, everything works in here. And moreover, I just have to make sure it doesn't repeatedly call our function. So say for example, if we would not have provided the dependency array, right, and if I save it this way, this would show something like this on the front end, but on the server, it would repeatedly provide you requests for that particular task detail. That is because useEffect also acts as the component did update hook. All right, so we have to provide a dependency array for comparison. It compares the current state and the dependency array that we have, and that would just make things easier for us. There you go. And now you can see that there's just one task that we are one request that is going on into the server, nothing major, and we're still getting the useEffect called only once and not multiple times like component did update. So this is the equivalent of component did mount and not component did update. All right, so this is basically what it is. So this is one change that we want to do, and you can already see that this actually looks simpler than than what it was earlier, the class component and all. And that's why people accept this kind of a functional component with the useState and useEffect combination. And similarly, I can do the same thing for the task list component as well, where I may want to, let me just comment this out. The map state to props and map dispatch to props and all those things would still stay the same. There's no change in that. And I'll just go for the useEffect hook at this point, because we don't need to go for a useState, because this map state to props gives you the state inside the props. So there's no useState in here. It'll just be useEffect. So const task list is equal to props. And first of all, I would like to go for the return statement. So again, the same old, like if there is no tasks at all. All right, and tasks, we are extracting it from the props. So it'll be something like const tasks is equal to props. And if no tasks, all right, then, oh, I may have to get rid of this bracket. So if no tasks, then it'll say no tasks to show. That is what it's showing right now. But then I would like to dispatch the load tasks props, because there is a load tasks prop that has been mapped. So what I can do here is use effect props dot load tasks, and I'd also give a dependency array. Oops. Oh, because probably I'm returning this. I should not return this. Yep. So basically this should not be a return statement, otherwise it will cause further problems. So this gives you a useEffect kind of a thing. And now you can see that the component is again a bit compact than what it was before. That's the whole beauty of React hooks, and people accept it more nowadays. And in future you'd see that everything would be React hooks. That's what I feel. But then again, we should always consider the class components, because older projects would have the class component already. All right. So this whole task list component and the task detail component implementation, I believe this is clear to everyone, right? Very good. Everyone, please confirm. So Shweta asks, useState is not used in here. That's correct, Shweta, because the state which we are considering is the state of the Redux store. So it's not the state of the component that we are using at any point. So in this case, useState is not at all required. It is the state of the Redux store that controls the props, and that controls the re-rendering portion. All right. Very good. So this is also one aspect as far as the hooks are concerned, and then there are certain other hooks as well that, like, even people say that sometime it would so happen that Redux might not be required, and you might just go with the there is something called a use reducer and use context hooks, which would allow you to use some Redux like functionality later down the line, but we are really far from that for now. And also there is a possibility where you can make custom hooks, so that is also there. So yeah, so things are progressing as far as making the code cleaner and cleaner, and hooks being the part of that whole process. All right, so this is something about hooks, and now let's move on to the next problem statement, that is replacing, oops, not this one, it's this. We want to replace our JSON server with an actual Node.js and Express REST API server. And this would not be interacting with the database, but we'd get at least some persistence going, where we would have some tasks that would be persisting onto the server unless the server is restarted. All right, so I'd be just setting up a very basic Node.js Express server, but that'll give you a very good introduction on how an Express server can be set, and if you want, you can explore more in that aspect as well. Also, in the next session, we are also going to cover some GraphQL. That'll again give you more introduction of the Express server and the GraphQL mechanism. All right, so let's go to the next problem statement. The simple problem statement is that we want to replace the JSON server that we have been using with an actual Node.js Express server, minus the database connectivity, because again, we are not focusing too much on Node.js, it's just an introduction. All right, everyone is clear on the problem statement? Okay. All right, very good. What about other participants? Just like to make it clear that everyone gets what I'm trying to go for in the next few steps. Okay. All right, so let me just keep this open. All right, and let me stop my JSON server, which means if I reload my tasks now, you'll just show no tasks to show. That's it, because there's no server running, and in the background there could be some error that we get, that is connection refused or something like that, and that's fine. All right, we would like to replace it anyways with the Node.js server in a while. So here, first I would have to create a folder for my Node.js server, and this is how you'd be going for the task manager API altogether. All right, and remember, the whole aim of Node.js server creation, two things is what we are aiming. One is to get you a firm introduction on what Node.js server could look like, and the other is setting ourselves for a GraphQL endpoint. And tomorrow we'll be working on this server again to make that whole GraphQL interaction possible on the front end and on the back end. All right, so that is there. Just one quick confirmation, like some people might have heard of GraphQL. Who here has heard of GraphQL? Maybe read about it or maybe worked on it? Anyone? So if you have not read about it, if you've not heard of GraphQL, it's a very interesting read. I'll just share with you the link, and we'll talk about more. We'll talk about GraphQL more, but this is basically a replacement to REST API. So first I'll create a REST API server, and then I'll replace it with a GraphQL server. Really interesting and really handy as far as the tool is concerned. I'll just put in this as a useful link over here. Oops. And it could be possible that maybe in some projects you might be using GraphQL as well. So that is some server side and client side interaction. Anyways, so right now we have no tasks to show, understandably so, because there's nothing inside our API created yet, and we'd like to create certain file. In this case, I'll just create one file, but in a usual API server, there are like multiple files that are there. And I'd also like to initiate my Node.js project first. And since we have this node available because we have already installed it right away before creating the Create React app and all, and we also have npm with us as well. I have certain older version, but this will be fine. So now, since we have this node and npm, the very first thing about creation of a Node.js project, and let me just note this down, is first of all initializing the project. Certain steps that we'd be following is first of all initializing the project, and that the command that we'd be following is npm init. That would initialize the Node.js project, create a package.json for you, and then I would install certain dependencies. This time around, I'm just looking for one dependency installation, that is Express. So that will be npm install Express. All right. We have been doing npm install, or I have been doing yarn add, by the way, in our React.js project, but npm install is equally good. And when I talk about Express, you'd see that Express, it's a very popular Node.js server-side framework. Or expressjs.com. It's a fast, unopinionated, minimalistic web framework for Node.js server-side programming. Right, and npm install Express can be done to install Express altogether. Just keep in this link as well for your reference. This is all backend that we're doing. All right. So we'd be installing Express, and then we would be creating the server, and then we would be running the server. Now, these two steps, I have just kept it abstract over here because running the server is probably quite simple. You can just go for a node and the file name. So I'll be creating a server.js file, and I'll be running the server.js file by node server.js. So these are the steps that I'm trying to perform in here: initializing the project, installing Express, creating the server.js, running the server.js. All right. So let's do these steps. First, I'll go for an npm init. So remember, I'm in my task manager API elegant folder. All right, that is my API, and then there is another folder for task manager elegant, that is my React.js client. All right, so we are just going for some API creation to start with. Npm init, and npm init would ask us a bunch of questions like what is the package name, what is the version, description. Maybe this is a dummy API to replace JSON server, right? Something like this. Entry point, it doesn't actually really matter at this point. So just hit it, enter, and just keep it the same, index.js. There's no testing that we need to do. So there's no test command at all. And there's no, yeah, there is a Git repository that I would like to go for. But yeah, this Git repository would come into the picture when you're actually publishing it on NPM. So it's okay. We don't have to have it. An author, we may say elegant, all right, something like this. And the license, doesn't really matter, the license actually. And then it asks us for a confirmation about the data. It's about to write it into a package.json file. So if I hit yes, all right, what it will do is inside this API folder, let me close this for a while. Let me open the API folder. And inside the API folder, you can find a package.json. Now, where else did you find a package.json? Anyone? Where did you find this package.json? In some other place? Recall having a package.json somewhere else? Anyone, any ideas? In the React project as well, in the task manager project. Very good. So which also tells you that the React project that we created with the Create React app toolchain, that also is a Node.js project. It has this package.json. So the rules will apply in here as far as installation of dependencies and everything is concerned. Only the thing is, like, we'd be having some server-side dependencies installed in here. So what I can do is I can install Express like this, npm install Express. And there will be some more familiar things that will be coming in here as well. So if we just check the installation, you see there's a node modules folder created. There's a package lock.json. In my project, it was yarn.lock because I was using a yarn project manager. But in here, you can see that there's a package.lock.json. That'll be when you're using npm as a dependency injection or dependency manager. All right. So you can also see that the dependencies object is populated now with Express, and that's the only that is the only dependency that I want to install inside this project. Maybe later on we'll like to go for some GraphQL related dependencies as well. But this process is quite familiar, where we are installing certain dependencies inside our project. One is Express for sure. All right. So I believe everyone is familiar with these files that are created. Yes. Okay. What about other participants? This is all from the React.js project that we did, for creating dependencies and installing and all, because that is also a Node.js project. All right. And now I'll create my server file. We'll call it server.js. You can call it anything. All right. And first of all, I'll just do a console.log. Just try and run this. All right, inside server.js. And I can go into my terminal. I'm already in my API elegant folder. You just run it. Node server.js, and that will show me inside server.js. Now, because I'm using Express, I'd be using the Express library. I'll include it over here, and I'd start using the Express to create an Express server. Now, when we talk about Node.js, Node.js, by the way, it's not any server or anything like that. Let me just show you the official website. Node.js is a JavaScript runtime built on Chrome's V8 JavaScript engine. All right, Chrome has a JavaScript engine, the Chrome browser. It actually compiles JavaScript by this V8 engine. So it's very fast that we don't even realize that things are compiling before they are running. So this V8 engine is also the one that is used in Chrome. It is open source. So the creator of Node.js thought that, okay, let's use the Chrome's V8 engine in Node.js as well, so that it can compile JavaScript and it can run JavaScript. So with that in mind, JavaScript becomes a runtime like JVM is, if you're a Java programmer, or maybe there's no other example of a runtime actually, but Node.js is a JavaScript runtime that allows you to run JavaScript on the server. Now with that, there are so many varieties. Like for example, we went for a development server creation with Create React App for React.js projects. And we can also create a backend API server with this Node.js that we have. All right. So it means that we as developers would have to create the server. There's no pre-built server that is available. And when I say that we need to create a server, it's not a very big deal. It's just like 2 to 3 lines of code and your server would be created. But the only thing is a developer has to create a server at this point. So what I can do is I can import, I can do something like import Express from Express. I believe everyone is familiar with this import statement that we have, right? We're just including Express from the Express library. We have been doing this for React as well. So everyone familiar with this import statement? Yes. Right. And I think we might have discussed it inside the first session that if I run this, because Node.js doesn't actually recognize this particular import statement correctly, we might not be able to run this import in here without a Babel implementation. So what we can do here is we can go for the Node.js module system import, that is the require statement, which is equivalent to this import. Express is equal to require from Express, right? Something like this, which is the same thing as this import is, and it'll give you that particular Express library inside this variable. So now if I run it, you can see that no errors whatsoever. It just gives me the blank command prompt, gives me the command prompt back essentially. So here we have included the Express, all right? And this is the same as the import statement, but there is no Babel implemented on the Node.js project, and hence it's not able to just comprehend this import statement. That's it. So now what I can do is I can go for something like const app is equal to Express and brackets. So this creates an Express application for us. And then this application can be used to create a server to listen to a specific port. And remember, we need to replace the JSON server. So I just listen to a port number 3001. That is the JSON server port. And then I'd go for a callback function, just saying that the server has started. This console log would be logged inside the Node.js console. All right. So if I now run this, you can see that it no more stops the whole thing. It doesn't give you the command prompt back, but it gives you the server started message. And now it keeps on listening to the port number 3000, which we have specified in here. And we can access it through localhost colon 3000 all the way. This to start with would give me an error. Let me just access it here. Localhost, oh, not 3000, but 3001. You can see that it gives me an error right away. Cannot get slash, this kind of an error. We'll see what this error is. All right, but the thing is that Express server is running. It's not giving me any error syntax wise, so there's no problem there. But there's only some server creation process that is missing, which is giving us this particular error, and it's a typical Express error. No problem in this. However, if I stop the server like Control C, then we will not get any response at all from the server, and that will be an actual server error, like the site can't be reached or something like that. All right. So this kind of a thing would be received. So this means that your server is stopped. It's not running at all. All right. So these 3 lines of code only to get a server running with Express. Very easy. All right. But the only thing is it's programmer's responsibility if you're programming in Node.js to create a server actually. All right. So first of all, these 3 lines that I done for listening to port number 3000, I believe these are clear. Very good. What about other participants? Okay. Other participants also please confirm. Knowing for the HTTP object. Yeah, that's correct, Rita. Usually what I do as a Node.js programmer to create a backend is use the combination of Express and HTTP. But if you're only using Express, there's no need of an HTTP server altogether. HTTP object is already implemented inside Express. All right. So now let's dissect the problem that we are having. Remember, first of all, what we are trying to do is we are trying to create a REST API. And as far as REST API is concerned, let me just refresh. They'll give me cannot get slash. And as far as REST API is concerned, there are so many types of requests. And the current request that is going to the server is a GET request. All right. So this request is from the browser. If I, for example, try and open Postman, let me just do that here. Okay. And I would try to go for a post request to this same server, and it would give me an appropriate message for that post request as well. Let's just wait for a while. Let's just have the Postman tool opened. It'll help you to provide a post request, by the way. So if I go for a post and if I hit send, you see that it gives me cannot post slash. So basically this get is an HTTP verb that is being used similar to that post. All right. And we know that there are so many other types of requests like get, post, put, delete, patch, and all. So whichever the app that we create as far as Express is concerned, the app that we create would have app.get to handle the get request, app.post to handle post request, app.put, app.patch, and app.delete. All the types of major HTTP verbs would be handled by these kind of requests. So right now what happens is it cannot get a response on the get request fired on the root route of the app that we have created. And what we can do is to mitigate this particular problem is that we can just create a root route handler. Like I can do something like app.get slash, that is the root path, and there'll be a function And this middleware function has request and response minimum. There's also something called next, but we're not going into that yet. So request is something that represents the request that is coming in, the header and the whole request object, the parameters, etc. And response is the response that we are going to send. So I can go for a response.send hello world, or maybe an h1 saying express works, right? This kind of thing can be done. So since I have modified my server, I'd have to restart it. Because this is a very bare minimum server. There's no automatic restart or anything like that. We'd have to manually do it. So I run the server again, and now instead of cannot get slash, this get request on the root path would hit this particular handler, and this would respond me with an h1 saying express works. All right. So if I reload, you can see express works. However, there's no post request, so you can still expect if I go for a post request, it will still give you cannot post. If there is a post request, for example, like app.post on the root route, and again a request response, something like this, and I can send something like post express works, right? So when I do something like this, and if I maybe restart my server again, get would stay the same, but if I go for post, you can see that post express works is displayed. So get and post, and then others like put, post, delete, patch, and all those things would still be available in this particular case. And all we now need to do is get certain routing done for the tasks resource. But I believe this is clear to all. Yes, the way we handled a couple of routes. All right, very good. What about other participants? Good. So the request that I'm trying to make is a get request to 3001/tasks, which obviously would give me cannot get /tasks. So now, since you have some idea on what is going on, can anyone tell me what should I do to respond to that /tasks URL? What should I use in here? app.get/tasks. Yes, that's correct. App.get. I'll go for /tasks because that's the one that we have in our API. There's no redirect, but we are just handling this. All right, Shweta? And there'll be a request response. And I can go for a response.send. And let's say there are also other response related functions, but I'll just keep it simple. I'll use send. Oh, I'll go for, let's say, h1/h1 get tasks works, something like this. All right, we'll not redirect anywhere, like we'll just handle this request. All right, so now I'd have to restart my server first, and I can go for a send. It is get tasks works, something like this. So this being done, and I believe everyone is clear with what Shubham suggested as a solution, right? This is clear to all. Is that correct? Okay. All right, very good. So this being done, we would like to go for another set of array that we'll be returning in here. And this is the good thing about this whole server side kind of a thing. If I, for example, go to my model file, which is here, I'll just copy this. I can reuse the code inside my API as well. Let me just paste it in here. And the models that I have, the model is task, and instead of export default, this would not be understood by Node.js. So we'll be following the Node.js module system. Module.exports is equal to task. Oops, task. All right. So what we are doing is we are creating a class which would enable us to create certain tasks, and we are going for a module.exports. So that is what I'll be importing in my server, and I'll be using it. So I can go for a const task is equal to require models task. All right. And what I can go for is, for now, just a dummy set of tasks, but usually you would connect with a database. We are not going for database connectivity this time. So I can go for a const tasks is equal to an array. Let's say learn API or learn Node.js, for example, and some description. All right. And some more tasks to be added. Maybe a couple of tasks can be removed. So learn Node.js, task number 2, task 3, 4, 5. All right. Apollo, by the way, it's a library that provides you facilities to create server and GraphQL and a client. We would go for Apollo client later in the next session. But we have certain tasks added. And in the response.send, I'll just send these tasks and that's it. All right. I'll just send these tasks. So what would now happen is if I restart my server for a GET request, instead of GET tasks works, what I can expect is a set of tasks that I have created on the server. So now this localhost 3001 should actually work because now we have our server running, we have a GET request fired, and if I go to my client, right, let me just minimize this, and if I refresh, while this should give us the list of tasks, it's still not giving us the list of tasks. Let's do an inspect. Let's see what's going on wrong. You can see that there's an error inside the console, and the error is related to this. Now, can anyone figure out what the error is? Can anyone tell me what this error is? Yeah, the port is accessible, but it's a cross-browser resource, or not cross-browser as well, like a you can say a cross-server resource sharing. CORE stands for cross-origin resource sharing. Yeah, so it's a cross-origin resource sharing. There is one origin that is localhost 3000, that is a different server. Another origin that, yep, Shweta is correct, port is different. Another origin is 3001, which is totally a different server, and one source is trying to access a different source. And that's basically causing the problem. The default mechanism of any server would be to avoid cross-origin requests. Otherwise, everyone would be able to access the server, right? So that is something that is happening on the server. I can actually manage it through the client as well, but we'll first get the whole cross-origin request solved from the server only. So permission should be given. Palak is right. So what we can do is we can use a very basic middleware npm install course. It's a very basic usage where we can use a function called app.use. App.use, by the way, it stands for all the methods. So when I go for an app.use command, it would mean that any request that comes in, get, put, post, delete, or patch, first goes through this app.use, and then their respective methods that are their handlers. So app.use stands for all the HTTP requests. And hence it is also used to create certain things called middleware. We'll be using course middleware to get the permission given. So I can import require course, and I can, right after I create the app, I can go for something like app.use course. Now this would give the permission to all the origins, all right, which means not just localhost 3000, but anyone would be able to access this now. However, we might want to restrict the access as well, like some specific origins should only be allowed to access. All those settings can be done in course, but we're not actually focusing on that, and hence I'm not going much into the course. But this essentially, if I restart my server, this would, let me just restart the server. This would actually allow me to request from the client. So if I now reload, Now you can see that Node.js, Express, GraphQL, everything is allowed. Still, there is a problem in here. Can anyone tell me what the problem is in the detail page? No API for detail page. Very good, Shubham. No API for detail page. I believe everyone would agree with Shubham on this. There's no API at all for the detail page as such. Yes. So we'll create one. App.getRequest again. Tasks, :id. Now you can see that this is something familiar on the front end as well. When we went for dynamic parameters, we went for this kind of a syntax. So majority in any JavaScript programming system that we go for, be it Node.js or React or Angular, this sort of a dynamic URL would be common. People have thought of this being something same for all of the URLs. So here I'll get a request response, and there is a request.params that is available, which would give us all the parameters. And if I do a console.log request.params, all right, and if I just maybe you know, request, let's say, task with an ID 2, right, and hit send. Oh, I have to restart my server. Let me just restart. So I restart my server. I request with an ID 2, hit send. It keeps on the request going, but on the server side, you can see that the params is giving us an ID object with 2 over here. So I can actually extract that ID from the params. So console, const, instead of doing a console log, I can go for a const ID is equal to request.params. That'll give me the ID, and then I can do a loop through these tasks and just return whichever the ID matches. So what I can do is like let task equal to null. I'll use the for in loop, so for let I in tasks. And usually you'd go for a request to the database, but here we don't have any database. So if tasks into the bracket I dot ID is equal to the ID that we're passing, all right, if that is the case, then just go for task equal to tasks into the bracket I, that particular index, and I'll just break, right? I'll go for a response dot send task. This is what a JSON server would also respond. All right, or maybe what JSON server might do is, yeah, if the ID doesn't match, it will just return null. So that's what I'm trying to replicate in here. Let task is null, and then I'm just going for the match of the ID, and at the end I'm just returning the task, whether it could be null or it could be the ID. All right, so I believe this whole get request, usually it'll be a database call, by the way, but I believe this right now is clear to all. All right, so now if I restart my server and if I send this request, you should get learn express, and hence if I even go to my front end, you can see you get learn GraphQL. Now everything is working with the whole request that is coming in, right? This server, by the way, it's not validated, and also user doesn't have to log in to access data from this server. That validation is done on the client side. Should also be done on the server side. But again, we are not discussing any server in here. We are just getting ourselves ready for GraphQL implementation. Right, so this is a very simple server that we have created, and it has a couple of requests that are get requests. We would like to change it to GraphQL, which would be keeping these things really simpler for us later down the line. But this is something that we have created thus far as a replacement to the JSON server. All right, I'm not going for the post or anything like that at this point. That is simply not necessary. All we needed to know was how to create an Express server and how to start an Express server and maybe manage a couple of routes that we wanted. All right, so I believe this whole thing is clear to you. Yes. All right, very good. What about other participants? Very good, very good. So this is where we are actually completing our React.js project. If we are not going to go for GraphQL, right? But then when GraphQL comes into the picture, there'll be some changes on the server. Also, there'll be some changes on the front end as well. All right. So maybe in the next session, we might just get the whole thing done completely. But with the JSON server and the front end that is React, our project was complete in the last session. Plus this authenticated routes made it fully done, you know. But then we went for certain other topics, which led us to the need of implementation of GraphQL in certain ways. So we would go for that kind of a thing, right? Okay, so let's. Yes, Kishan, I would do that. So let's call it a day. And if you have any questions, you can let me know. And if you don't have any questions, just say 0. And then once that is done, I would just go for some discussion with Kishan on this. So, all right, very good. Okay. All right, so let's call it a day, guys. And when we meet on Friday, we'll be going for the GraphQL implementation. All right. So till then, bye-bye, take care, and have a great day ahead.